Welcome to When Spreadsheets Hit the Fan, a Birdview podcast. This is a show for leaders in fast-growing professional service organizations looking for the latest conversations around service delivery best practices. Let's get into the show.
Hello, and welcome to When Spreadsheets Hit the Fan. I'm your host, John Litterick. In today's episode, I talked to Ashleigh Clark. Ashleigh Clark is the Chief Optimization Officer with Process Alchemist. Process Alchemist is an online training company focused on teaching you to create flexible, adaptable program management strategy for your organization that's going to help you optimize processes without creating unnecessary overhead. Ashleigh has spent almost 2 decades in program and project management roles across various industries. She's had a very heavy focus in data and analytics, and she designed the training in Process Alchemist as a way to fast track process improvements for teams that feel they struggle with simply just getting their work done. Now, fun fact, in her spare time, Ashleigh has recently learned to ride electric unicycles and electric skateboards, and she regularly enjoys riding these in nice weather. I'd like to see a video of that someday. Today, Ashleigh and I discuss the dangers of implementing software without a proper implementation strategy. Ashleigh will share some of her observations on this subject. And of course, at the end, we'll have Ashleigh share a related spreadsheet story. If you like the episode and what you hear, please follow the show and leave a rating wherever you're listening. Let's jump right into it. So, Ashleigh, you've been around the proverbial block hundreds of times. I always start this interview with the same thing because we get guests who have a lot of experience in the field and what they want to talk about, right? So what's the biggest mistake that you're seeing organizations making, and what should they stop doing right away?
Sure. So organizations need to stop expecting a tool to fix all of their problems and recognize that the solution to any problem has to include the right mix of people, processes, and tools.
Yes, this really resonates with me. So can you give me a specific example where you've seen people make this mistake, and what was the negative impact on the organization in terms of tangible things such as revenue and resources? And also, we're also interested here in this show on the intangible things like employee engagement, brand reputation. Can you speak to that?
I've seen this so many times now, and I think most everyone has too, where organizational leadership gets sold on the idea of a specific tool because of a demo, a website, a really good salesman, and they purchase it. Right? They purchase it, drop it into your toolbox and say, here, use this, and expect the problem to be solved. So first off, I love task boards, but I've seen this a lot recently with workflow tools like Jira, where someone says, hey, we're going to start using Jira to track all of our work. But they don't realize that someone still has to understand scope, budget, and deliverables, create tasks and timelines, update tasks, and maintain the board. Make sure things get moved up from the backlog when it's time to work on them, and that resources have to know what that process is for them and what their responsibilities are. Even if something saves time in the long run, it still takes time for someone leading up this effort to set all of this up and maintain it. And if you don't invest in the right processes and people along with your tool, you end up wasting money on a tool that didn't solve your problem. You end up with a chaotic situation where people just start doing whatever they want. And you'll find you have to spend more time, money, and effort years down the road trying to overhaul and standardize everything so you can benefit from something you should have implemented in the beginning. And as far as your brand goes, it really makes you look like you just don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, well, I've seen that a lot. And, so much so that, one of the things when someone becomes a Birdview customer is that we have a very defined implementation and training path. We call it path to success because, in the early days of the company, we found, just selling the software wasn't enough. It's like you're saying, there has to be a proper implementation and training plan. So yes, I've been doing this for 25 years and I've seen that a lot. A lot of times, when you talk to someone in information technology or project management about, what the problem was, it wasn't necessarily the product, it was the way the product was implemented or the way the training was done or way change management, user adoption was handled. So, I think, the stats say that can be up to 75% of the reason for the root cause of like a failed software implementation. So yeah, this is going to really resonate, I think, with our listening audience. And yeah, it makes so much sense to me. So what should organizations do instead then?
So when you decide to purchase a tool that you think will help your organization, make it a project. Identify the right subject matter experts needed to understand the problem you're trying to solve. learn how the tool can actually solve that problem, create a process around how the tool can be used, invest in training the users on the right way to use the tool, and like you said, have a real implementation strategy for how to make the tool effective. And you also need to identify some KPIs. So check back in after 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, and make sure the process you implemented matches those KPIs and that it's also accomplishing the goals you had for the tool.
Yeah, I really, really like what you're saying, particularly the part about the key performance indicators, because, if you don't understand what success looks like, then you can have really unrealistic expectations, right? And that needs to be, identified for everyone so everybody knows what they're working towards, right? And I think any implementation strategy that doesn't have like the KPIs that you outline there, it's lacking or flawed in my opinion. So I think that I really agree with that very much. So here's the part of the show where we put the guest on the spot early on here. How could you take your start theme and boil it down to one sentence, just a simple maxim? Are you up for the challenge?
Absolutely. So stop relying solely on tools and start developing real strategies.
Good. I like it. I'll get you maybe to repeat that again at the end of the program because I like that.
Absolutely.
So, to be frank, I think someone listening into this would think, this is sort of a common sense topic. But I think the interesting thing is, why are organizations not doing it? Like, why, are the numbers so high where so many organizations fail in this area on implementation and training? What's driving this, obvious, mistake that organizations are making? What do you think is happening?
Sure. So I think a lot of it is wishful thinking. Generally, when someone's trying to sell you on something, they talk it up, make you feel warm and fuzzy about it, make it sound like the greatest thing in the world. And when you've been struggling with something, you want to believe that. And you want to believe that if you just throw this tool into the mix, it's going to fix everything. And another part of it, especially right now, is that everyone is overworked, overallocated, and stressed. So leaders want to buy something that may solve a problem, but they don't really have the resources available with the time to create an implementation strategy. So it's unclear to them typically how these resources should prioritize this over the 12 other projects that they're already on, especially when implementing a tool is viewed as an internal task, and many of those other projects may be revenue generators. It's much harder to assign a revenue value to resources completing an internal implementation, so they tend to not be prioritized as heavily as they should, so you can see the actual value from them.
I actually have never heard that before. I never thought about it from that angle. And I think probably a lot of our listening audience is probably like me. It's like, they've never really thought about the fact that people don't assign as much value to the implementation and training as they do to some of the other things like the business case, the upfront requirements, the purchase of the product. That's really good. So, besides your personal experience, do you know any theoretical evidence, any empirical evidence that somebody listening to this program could listen to?
I think a lot of the evidence is in the way organizations struggle today to complete their work and the number of times outside consultants end up being engaged to restructure an organization to make it more efficient. Since 2017, I've been hired or staffed onto projects exactly like this where someone says, please help, we can't get any of our work done. And they show you what they're doing today, and they have SharePoint, Jira, Confluence, Microsoft Project, Smartsheet, Asana, Birdview, PSA. All the tools are there, but they still can't figure out how to organize anything. So I've worked with them to create demand management processes, steering committees, resource management strategies, and everything else they need to be able to use these tools effectively to manage their workloads.
Excellent. Interesting. Okay. What are some other, reasons to do the behavior advising?
Sure. So first off, when you have the right people and processes in place to implement and manage your systems, everyone starts doing everything the same way. So if a resource using one Jira board, for example, needs to shift to using another Jira board for a project, there's no onboarding or training time needed to get them up and running on that board. They should be able to switch over and pretty seamlessly understand how it works. So doing things consistently will save you time and money in ramp up and in other steps of your process as well. Additionally, people need to have dedicated time to use these tools to complete these types of tasks. And this falls into something I talk about a lot. Nobody should be assigned to have 100% utilization on project work. Everybody needs some amount of operational time to keep internal processes up to date so that they continue to provide that value. And when they have that, the value comes in when someone can just look at a task board and see what's going on with a project, or follow the process that's in place to get a status on something, rather than what we've all had to do plenty of times, emailing, instant messaging, calling, reaching out to multiple people, just trying to get information on what's going on or what's the status or how can we fix a problem. And lastly, it really just makes sense. So think about everyday life. I bought a new grill recently. If I told someone at my house with no grilling experience to start using the grill to cook, am I going to get an edible meal? Probably not. Because someone has to read the manual, understand how it works, purchase ingredients, prep the food or find a recipe, and cook it, and that person needs to understand at least basic cooking terminology. So in most of these situations, you always have to have the right people, processes, and tools.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think this is becoming really, really apparent for remote workers, right? Because to work effectively remote, there has to be a huge tech stack, right? And of course, you have to be a bit more self-reliant on running that tech stack yourself. And what I see and hear from a lot of people is, people just keep throwing more stuff on the tech stack for the remote workers, but they're not really, training them or showing them like how it all is supposed to integrate or work together. There's no real plan, right?
Right. Or when you choose which one.
Yeah. And, and I think a lot of remote workers are probably, this is just one example. I know this applies in, every situation for people that aren't working remotely too, that are working on site. But I think it's been really, in my experience, it's 25 years working remote. This is really true. What you're saying is that people are just given a lot of technology to work with, but they don't even really know like how it should be worked, what the real original processes are. So they're only scratching the surface on the capabilities in a lot of cases, right? Whereas if the organizations would take some time and bring in a consultant like yourself who could set up a proper implementation and training plan, I think you'd get a lot more productivity, on-site workers and remote workers. But just speaking my own opinion, mostly remote workers, right? So, I've talked to a lot of colleagues in other companies that are working remote, and a lot of times half their problem is just using the tech stack that they've been given, right?
Right.
And there's not really great documentation, and they're trying to figure it out, and all of that, it's problematic. And I think what you were saying too about giving people enough time between the kind of the important work, we'll call it wrap time, is important, right? I've seen situations in on-site work where a manager's running from meeting to meeting to meeting, and by the fifth meeting, they don't even know what the fifth meeting's about.
Right.
They did know what it was about at the start of the morning when they looked at the calendar, but they haven't had even 15 minutes just to kind of like finish their thought process from the fourth meeting, and then prepare for the fifth meeting. So I agree with you that these are the things that need to be built in to everybody's daily calendar, weekly calendar, and you need someone that can map that process out and understands it.
Absolutely. And to your point there, another topic around that is, that concept of, but this is the way we've always done it. So when you start implementing these tools without the processes, you get a lot of, this is just how we do it today, so we should keep doing it that way. And that's where you fall into that. You need that implementation strategy to figure out the right way to use those tools.
Absolutely. Interesting. So let's shift to a different type of question. So the question I want to shift to is, how quickly do you think our listeners could see these benefits if they follow what you advise?
Sure. So it does take some investment up front because you typically have to free up your resources to make processes a priority to accomplish all of this, as we kind of discussed. And if things are really bad, you may need some outside help. But typically when I've worked on these types of projects in the past, you can implement smaller changes first and then larger changes as part of your bigger strategy, which gives you the ability to start seeing some value in 2 to 3 months. But really that depends on how much time you're willing to put into it.
Excellent. Okay, very good. Well, our listening audience really values how can they take these insights and make them actionable. So, if someone was listening to this and said, I would like to start doing this and start doing what Ashleigh is saying and stop doing, the bad behavior. How do they get started? Like, what's step one?
So step one is to understand what value you want from the tools you have in-house or plan to purchase. If you know what the actual problem is you want to solve by implementing the tool, you can find the right people to help you use the tool to solve that problem.
Okay. And are there any other steps, like maybe two more that would follow on from that?
Yeah, so if we put this into an action plan, once you understand the problem you want to solve, you need to understand your current state, what exists today or what's being done today that was supposed to solve the problem but didn't. Identify the gaps that need to be addressed to actually solve that problem now. Learn how the tool works, which could require some training. Document the optimal future state. So knowing how the tool works, what people are needed, and what the processes should look like to solve the problem. Create an implementation plan or roadmap. Like I said, you aren't going to fix everything at once. So look for those small, easy wins that you can implement early and focus on the most important priorities first. And then just get to work. Make sure all the people you need are prioritized and that they have the appropriate allocation to have the time to do the work.
Excellent. This is one of the ones where the action plan does sound very easy, but, I want to play devil's advocate here. We know sometimes things go awry. What could go wrong here?
So organizational priorities could shift, causing delays. That happens all the time with most of these organizations. The tools or the resources that have the knowledge you need could leave. And the tool you purchased may not actually be designed to work the way you need it to in order to solve your problem, which may cause you to have to backtrack or pivot.
Excellent. Well, I want to challenge you to say that excellent little one-sentence maxim again here so that anybody listening to it remembers it, because it was pretty catchy.
Absolutely. Stop relying solely on tools and start developing real strategies.
Very good. Well, you know what? I really enjoyed this conversation. I think it's a part of, business processes, business life cycles that gets overlooked, and yet it's so important, right? I don't know off the cuff what the numbers are, but I know it's over 75% that this is the reason why, things fail, right? Because, I think the world's gotten pretty good at making business cases. I think the world's gotten very good at, figuring out requirements for the most part. But from that point on, right, buying the software, building it on your own, and then rolling it out to the users, I see so many problems that could be avoided if they were doing like what you're saying, right? Challenges with user adoption.
Right.
Challenges with understanding, what the value is. It's this is a little different than what you're talking about. It is related. Is a lot of times, the assumptions on why someone bought something, do you test them? Or do you have a way to test the benefits? Is it, or do you need to make a course correction with your implementation and training? And that's where it ties back in with it, right? So I think this is a part a lot of times of processes in companies that gets missed. And what I'm excited is you've raised it to everyone's consciousness in this conversation. I think people, I know I'm going to go away and I'm going to think a lot more about, when I'm doing something, am I just reacting, or do I actually have, a well thought out plan for the deployment, right? And the training and I think one thing we didn't talk about is about like the feedback loop for improvement, right? And part of your training is like, okay, you've used it, you've done it, go back and think about, how you can improve it, all of these things. So I really like this topic, and I hope, we can have you on as a guest. Maybe in the next time we could maybe talk about like an actual case study of this.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe a contrast and compare one company that didn't have a training plan and how it turned out for them versus another company that did have a training plan. That might be a good part too, if you're interested to be on the show again.
Yeah, I would love that. And a point that you just brought up, processes are never truly finished. You are always going to have to refine and adjust based on updates to your software or new technology or just making things better from what they originally were. So to your point, once you implement this, you do still have to keep circling back to say, okay, we have this and that's great, but what can we still do to make it better?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, our guests are always wanting to know this. Okay, what's your favorite spreadsheet story or, spreadsheet horror story?
Right. I'm sure we've all seen something like this in our careers. I've touched a little on how tools aren't always designed to be used the way that we use them. A few years ago, I was on a consulting project to improve demand management processes for a data and analytics team. And in my current state interviews, everyone kept talking about this great tool someone had to track all of their projects and statuses and how they used it all the time. So naturally, I was excited. Well, I finally got a hold of this tool, and it was just a single tab spreadsheet with a list of all active projects for the team, the requesting team, so not the person to contact with questions or information you needed, but just the team that was requesting it, the IT owner, who I believe was the same person for each row, and a basic red, yellow, green indicator for the project. It didn't tell me anything about why the project was that color, what the goal of the project was, how it was prioritized, when it should be done, nothing that you really needed to understand what was going on with the project. So that's, to my point, just because a spreadsheet could be used to document this information, it doesn't mean it should be, and it doesn't make it a tool.
I've seen a lot of that. So that really resonated with me. Okay, well, thank you for that too, Ashleigh, and hope to have you back real soon.
Absolutely.
You've been listening to When Spreadsheets Hit the Fan, a Birdview podcast. Keep connected with us by subscribing to the show in your favorite podcast player. If you like what you've heard, please rate the show. That helps us to keep delivering the latest and best practices for professional service teams. Until next time.